All right, we'll call this meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you all. Is there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Nope. Just a couple announcements. The Humane Society had their spaghetti supper lunch on Saturday, and it was fabulous. Jay and I enjoyed it very much. As well, East Cooley has their AGM tomorrow night, Tuesday at 7 o'clock in East Cooley. So if you would like to attend, they're always looking for new members. And as well, the Royal Tyrrell Museum has the speaker series every Thursday at 11 a.m. And some of you have attended it, and it's supposedly amazing. So get out there and enjoy. And then finally, we have Family Day Unplugged. They are looking for a couple more volunteers. Students, they're preferring students in grade 11 and 12, just because they can kind of get more interactive with the kids. So if any of you know students out there who would like to get some volunteer hours, April or myself will be willing to sign your card. They're looking for 1:30 to 5 o'clock. So if you got time on Monday, let's get out and help them. It's a great event. And I know how hard those gals work on that. All right, let's get on with the agenda. We're going to go to 2.1 and the recycling option survey.
Hi, so I included in the agenda package, you have the results of the survey. So you can see we had an excellent response to this survey. 970 people took part in the survey. We had 30 who did the paper ones at the library and the BCF, and the remainder were online. You can see through the graphs that the highlights were 71.94% of people who took the survey are interested in curbside recycling. 28.06% are not. The most popular was weekly collection, an alternative weekly collection. And there was it was very narrow between commingled and sorted. It was half and half, really. And 68.36% were willing to pay $8 to over $11+ a month for this service. So those were the highlights that I wanted to let you see. And you saw in the package that there was also some images of different options. So there's the carts or there's the blue boxes. So really all I wanted to do was share with you the results, what everybody said. We did have a number of people. It was some people really loved it. Some people really hated the idea. But, the majority, nearly 80% really wanted to see it. So,
comments? Lisa?
I will just say I'm not surprised by the results. Throughout the last 8 years sitting on council, it's been a resounding topic for discussion. So it's actually pretty neat to actually see it on paper in regards to those results. Sorry about that. And thanks for giving people the opportunity to be able to have a say on that. Thanks, Julie.
Tony?
Yeah, just a couple questions. You said it was a resounding success. Like, what kind of percentage were we looking at for a response? I can see there's 931 that answered there. Roughly 11% of the population, or what would be 15% households?
So we've got, you've got our population's 8,900 and something. Yeah. So nearly 1,000 people. So that's a pretty hefty percentage of people who took part. And we've got 4,000.
Statistically significant surveying counts on less than 1% of the population on average. So to have a 10% response rate, if it's accurate, is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Okay, so that just leads me to my next question. And I notice of those 900 that responded, why are there significant numbers that have skipped most of the questions?
I don't know. They didn't want to, because it wasn't compulsory to answer every question, so they decided to skip some of the questions.
Some of it was if you and what route.
And it depended which went, yes. So if you said you didn't recycle, then you got sent certain ways, and then some maybe didn't want to answer all of the questions. So,
because if you factor in the skipped one, I mean, your percentage turnout to the survey is substantially lower.
Well, sure, but I can't, I put the survey out there and people answer which questions they want, right?
I guess, Tony, sort of a couple of comments. So you can only ask people to provide their information that they provide. So I guess I look at question 2. So 931 out of 966 answered the question. So I would look at that as being an overwhelming people answered that question, not skipped it, right? I think it's, so question 2, if we go through this, is a bit of a misnomer, because do you currently recycle? If you then look at question 3, what materials do you recycle? Well, number 1 are actually things that you take back to darts, right? So they're actually the things you have a bottle deposit system on. So I think if the question was rephrased, do you currently recycle with, that does not include taking stuff back for a deposit system, you might have a different response than the 90% that actually said yes to it. I think that if you're looking at, again, question 4, which is, there's 855 out of 966 have answered that question. Again, that would be a pretty high number of people that answered the question and didn't skip it, right? So, but there are, it does depend on how you, like when it asks what kind of collection do you prefer, I see 330, so roughly you're 2/3, 1/3 that answered the question. And sometimes people just don't know, right? Like they don't answer they don't know what they want, so they kind of leave that up to people that make those, that know what decisions to make, or as if you want that. So I think it kind of depends really on some of these questions.
Fred?
Julie, can you tell me, in SurveyMonkey, was the item ticked off that people could only answer once, and it keeps track of the IP address?
So every IP address only could answer once. Okay. Yes, that's right.
Jay?
Thanks, Your Worship. And Fred, I think that's a great question, because I think when we're talking about surveying, it's always important to know that there are processes in place to try to make the results as fair as possible. And even if we were to look at some of the lower responded to questions, even to have 600 plus responses to any survey in this community is practically unprecedented. So it's important that there are processes in place to make sure that it's not a few people with an agenda.
Right.
So they'd have to go about using several different devices that are still actually attached to separate servers, not just, I mean, if they tried to use their iPad and their phone at home, it's one IP address. Right. So this sort of thing, I think we can feel comfortable so long as, was there a mechanism in place to ascertain whether or not they actually lived inside Drumheller proper?
There wasn't. We discussed it quite a lot, and sometimes it's quite hard to come up with a question, because before we did home ownership, and then that meant that renters. So in the end, we didn't. But if we did have some concerns, we could always go back and look at the IP addresses. I mean, and obviously they're not in this report, but I've got the names of people who put their name forward for a compost bin. And I can see, I mean, I know most of the people on there, and they live in Drumheller. So, I mean, we can go deeper if we want to, but I do feel that the majority of people, if the odd person from outside Drumheller took it, I think it was the odd person. I don't think it was a lot.
So, I think it's fair to say that with some contamination possible, it's fair to say that the numbers are accurate, plus or minus 10% even.
Right.
Which would still be within a reasonable degree of statistical certainty for feeling confident about these. At the same time, though, given that there was an incredibly unscientific poll put in the field by the Drumheller Mail at the exact same time, I think it's, and the numbers, there was one question, are you in favor of curbside recycling or not? And it was incredibly close, 52-48, I think in favor.
No, against.
Against, so 52-48 against. And so, well, I think what that speaks to, given that you had 30 hard copy responses and potentially 900 online, is that we're talking about different ways for people to interact with a particular survey. So, I think one of the things that I'm more curious about now that we have these results, because I'm always concerned about asking questions by its nature, studying things by by its nature, changes those things,
Right.
right? And so I'm curious more about what expectation have we raised for people that the end of the scope is it might be as much as $11 a month.
Right.
Do we have any information that gives us a ballpark range for what the ongoing operational cost per household could be? So that we haven't raised a bizarrely low expectation for what the cost might actually be per homeowner?
So we put that number in, Councillor, because we actually had a good idea of what those costs were. So again, if you're looking at doing alternate week collection, different container, you're still using the same vehicle to pick up material every single week, but so our costs for that we know very well. In some of it, there was some variability where it depends on if you're doing commingled recycling or sorted recycling. Because commingles, and I think it was mentioned in there, doesn't actually, would most likely leave the community and have to go to Calgary to get sorted, whereas the sorted, so bit higher cost because of transportation. Sorted recycling has a higher cost on the collection side, but a lower cost on the processing side because you're getting a cleaner product. So it's a pretty good number. I'm not going to say that it's plus or minus a nickel, right? But we're probably in that 15% range, which is pretty reasonable for
at the outlying $11 a month mark.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Raising expectations, of course, is really what I'm trying to get at. So I want to. Do we have a rough expectation? I'm not going to hold you to it, Daryl. Just a rough estimate of what the capital input costs would be for a facility to sort these things. And potentially new carts for all.
So our portion, well, I guess the capital cost for us would be about $55 a cart delivered if we were to Now, again, of course, this is never as simple as we all think it is. If you're doing commingled recycling, you can use a cart quite easily because, of course, everything goes in the one container, and this is what most communities have. But again, that material then goes to Calgary to get processed in a place where realistically, all of the recycling in a year from Drumheller doesn't add up to 1 day's worth of what they're getting, right? So it's pretty easy. So the capital cost is about $55 a cart per house. So that's $175,000 roughly for that. If you're doing sorting, you would do blue box, not cart, because of course you need to be able to sort the material. So again, you're more expensive on the front end because now you have to sort the material in a truck. But knowing that there's already a sorting facility in Drumheller that does paper and plastics and cardboard and stuff, for the landfill, it probably just means a little bit extra, either more staff, increase their staffing. It doesn't mean that they probably have to build another building or expand their sort lines or anything like that. So on that end, your costs are higher on the collection side, lower on the cost of blue box is probably about $8 a box, thereabouts. So lower on that side. But there are offshoots to that sometimes you don't get as much participation as you do with a commingled system. So again, this was all about trying to gauge whether there was any interest or not. Yep. I think the next step is to do a bit more research on what we think a system could look like, if that's what we want, and then bring it back and then let people make those decisions from there. So,
is it fair to say that is it fair to characterize the previous stance of the Drumheller and District Solid Waste Management Association as being incredibly resistant to the idea of a curbside recycling program in Drumheller?
Yeah, I think that'd be a fair comment. And I think, again, in part because if you were to do a commingled system, then none of the material from Drumheller would go to their facility anymore. And now that would mean there's a gap for them. If you went to a sorting facility, though, there could be an increase in business for them, increase in material, increase in, be able to hire more people to actually do the work. But change is difficult sometimes, and people are very comfortable in what they like to do, and don't want to actually perhaps want to see an expansion, but don't know what it actually means to them. So
right. So that's just an element. I mean, in terms of I think it's important for council to remember that we have 2 votes out of more than 12 on that board, and that coming up with a system that may not necessarily engage the Drumheller and District Solid Waste Management Association may be required, because we're not in any position to compel them to follow any system that we might design. And so it'll be important for us to keep that in mind going forward, that's a board on which we sit and are certainly hold no majority sway in any way, shape, or form. So that being said, I'm very curious to see what the next step entails in terms of what the actual cost might be. Going forward, I'm imagining that much like any utility, we'd have to have that cost, whether it was $7 or $11, we'd have to have that cost from each and every ratepayer, regardless of whether they were participating in the program or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of ways you can do recycling. So I'll give you you can do the opt-in side. So basically what we would do is just say, hey, private contractor, if you want to provide recycling services in the town of Drumheller, you can do that, and then they can contract with me and with you, but not to anybody else on our streets, for instance. You would absolutely pay more than 10 or 11 bucks a month for that service, because of course it's like delivering or picking up something specifically from you. If you got a lot of people on your street, you might get a bit of a break on it. If you're going to do it community wide, then that's where everyone has to, you're opting, you don't have to recycle, but you're still paying the fee for it. And I guess a comment would be is that you don't have to throw garbage out, but we all pay for garbage whether you throw it out or not right now. So it would be much the same thing. So.
And lastly, is there plans to include, with the information that comes back, as an alternate program, just increasing the number of locations where people could bring their material?
So that, excuse me, that would be an option, and that had come up, I think, maybe one of the Facebook questions, and it was actually from Councillor DeMott. So I had mentioned earlier that it's about $55 a home, $150,000 for doing everyone curbside for the carts. Each of those units is about $35,000. So if you provide 2 units into the community, because they're all in pairs, right now you could provide 2, for instance, to say Knapmine, which would give you the equivalent of providing half the carts to half the community. So I think it would be a question about what do you want to balance off with as far as providing that service. And we don't own those trailers. Those trailers are actually owned by the Solid Waste Association, so we'd have to somehow provide some compensation to them to purchase those. And because I don't think they're looking at that for any community right now. So.
And it's also fair to say that we bear no operating costs for the pickup from there. Is that right?
That's correct. Although we do pay a little bit of money right now on our utility bills, $250 a month, that goes to help offset the cost of recycling. Very, very small. So,
but just in general,
yeah.
You could say that operates the plant versus.
That's right.
Yeah,
it's the whole thing. And just one of the comments, just to point out that Trochu, who is also one of the member of the association, they do their own blue box recycling. So their material actually goes to Red Deer. That doesn't even come here. So they have a curbside collection once a week. So.
Fred?
I would tend to equate this with the bin, the commercial bin pickup. I still have had for years a problem that I'm told who I'm doing business with rather than a local business. But that's another story. We haul our commercial stuff out of my business rather than participate in that. And I think I would want the option of opting out for those that do it on a regular basis and go down and do the recycle. I want to mention also that my rough calculations last Solid Waste Management Association that Drumheller contributes about $69,000 a year in recycled, like as our recycled material that's a revenue for the Solid Waste Management Association. So you have to wonder, the money has to come someplace. Nothing's for free, and it all ends up going in a circle. So our $5, $11 a month charge may be in addition to an increased cost for just picking up garbage, because our offsetting with recyclables will be gone. So just
Well,
that as a point.
The only thing about that, Councillor, is that the recycling and the garbage side of the landfill are completely separate accounting parts. So if, for instance, and I'm not suggesting any of these things, but if, for instance, you took the recycling out of the landfill and it went somewhere else, then what they would be looking at is a deficit on their recycling side, but they'd also be looking at a lot less work. So I would expect that they would have reduction in staffing and service and things like that. So there is definitely because there is two different sides to the to their ledger sheet. So, I think that, you know, again, where this goes, there's very few places that do opt-in recycling, right? Because again, it's all about the travel, right? It's about the ability to travel, and it's really different because it's also the ability to process the material. So if you were to do an opt-in blue box, you might get people that are willing to take that someplace and sort that material on their own and do a good job of it. If you were doing cart system, now you're into someone that's buying a $200,000 piece of equipment. They want to make sure that they've got a guaranteed number of places that they do. So,
Christine?
Thank you very much. My question was, I guess, Daryl, you'd probably know better. You said before, not too long ago, we had they weren't taking a lot of our recycled material in China. So is that basically not going to make the Drumheller landfill any money if we do try to keep our recycling in town versus sending it somewhere else?
So the green wall, as it's called, is what China did. It's funny, I was reading an article this afternoon related to this about it. But basically what China stopped doing is accepting a bunch of garbage that was being sent over disguised as recycling. So one of the disadvantages of commingled recycling is that, you know, an advantage is you get to throw everything in one container. A disadvantage is that being on the receiving end of that stuff, sometimes the stuff that gets thrown in there is literally garbage, right? I mean, I've seen personally in plants where there's diapers and lawn chairs and stuff mixed in with your pickle jars and pizza boxes. So because Drumheller sorts the material and it's a cleaner sort at the beginning, they're still able to sell some of the material where some of the other communities aren't able to sell it, because what all of these companies want that are buying material want is a clean material, right? So the company that recycles plastic doesn't want any paper products mixed with their plastic. Conversely, the paper companies don't want anything that's like glass or plastics in there. So you can do a lot better job by sorting it, so you can have the ability to sell where in other areas you may not have the ability with a commingled system. So again, there's pluses and minuses. You know, a plus for commingled, and again, I'm not advocating for either side, but a plus on the commingled is that it's easy for people, so people are far more willing to participate and participate in greater volume. The downside, of course, is then you have to find someplace that will deal with all that material.
But like a best case scenario would be that the majority of the population would start recycling. We'd have it here in Drumheller. The landfill could make more money potentially off of that, have other jobs, more revenue coming in for them. So
yep, correct.
It's pretty good if they're on board.
Yep, correct. Yep, you're right.
Tom?
Yeah, lots of good comments. Thank you for the survey. Very well done, I think. So my general comments would be, obviously, we like recycling. I know my family recycles everything all the time. We even send glass into Calgary with my son when he comes out. So we definitely like the idea of recycling, and the more recycling, the better, and the more that we can do to get more people recycling, the better. I personally need a little bit more, and Councillor Garbett touched on this, I need some more statistical information, that if we do it this way, it's going to cost me this. If we do this way, it's going to cost me this. And I think that's what people in Drumheller are going to need before, we can make a definite decision. The survey is very good. It's very positive. very optimistic. But when it comes down to, oh, it's going to cost me that much, then you might get a little bit of a different opinion. So, and whether it's commingled or sorted or whatever, I know we do have a little bit of a problem when we do the cleanup day with people sorting things. They don't sort very well. So, all of these things, I think I need some of this hard information in terms of, okay, we're going to have this type of bin. It's going to cost me this much per month or per year. It's going to cost me this much in capital cost, whatever. I just, very good start, but I think we need to turn it now to administration to get some of this detailed information so we can make more informed decision.
And I think, Tom, one of the thoughts is that, the whole purpose of the survey was to find out to gauge whether or not people were interested or not. I think if we had, if some of these numbers were reversed, this probably would have been a fairly short discussion, right? So it sounds, from what we see here is that there is an interest in here. So now it's the next step in our minds is take this away, actually do some more detail on what a program could actually look like for the community, and then bring that back to council in a couple of months to be able to get the feedback on it. So, and then go out to the public to say, okay, so based on what we heard, here's what it looks like for some programs, and we've firmed up some of the numbers, and are you still in support of it? So.
Okay, anybody else? All right, I would just like to say that I ironically got a call from a counselor from a BC community about our size last week. I'm not sure how he heard we were talking about recycling, but anyways, he reached out. His comment was they started it in September last year, and they do the one source recycling. And before they did that, they did what we do right now. His comments were that now, since they've implemented it, their educational part, so there's the community staff they've actually had to hire staff to help promote this program and educate people and everything else. And now they've actually hired a recycle bylaw that goes through all the bins because of the way it's being recycled. And lastly, he said that their contamination rate is skyrocketed because his example was somebody who cleans or takes a salad dressing container, plastic, hard plastic, doesn't rinse it. It goes in there, it gets on the cardboard. Now the cardboard's contaminated the paper. And he said that they are probably throwing more recycling now in their landfill. And I'm 100%, so don't get me wrong, I'm about recycling. I have a bin at our back door, we fill it, we go, we sort it. These are just things that this community, and I can connect you with them, but he just said beware, because yes, everybody's doing it. It's communities across the province and across Canada, but he said do your homework. Just because everybody's doing it, make sure it's something that, and I know we're in a time where we want to help the environment, we want to make things better. It's just stuff we need to really think about. All right, anybody else?
I'll add a comment. So one of the differences about BC, and actually I think we'll talk about that under 6.1 with Councillor Makawecki. So BC's actually legislated to recycle. They have an extended producer responsibility bylaw. So that whether they want it, but it's determined by the producers of what kind of program they put in there. So the producers themselves or their association have created what they've done is a commingled program, and the producers would be responsible to pay for the inspectors and some of these other things in there. But and I guess just the last comment is that just because our stuff is sorted doesn't mean that it's perfectly clean either, right? So our stuff is certainly cleaner, but it's not. I mean, there is definitely contamination in our products as well. So.
And he did raise that comment about BC, but he said unfortunately the way their provincial government, they don't get the funding. So people are actually, although they're not supposed to be paying for it, they are paying. It's coming out of their household pockets. So just something to, let's just be careful in these decisions, that's all. Anybody else? All right, let's move on to 2.2.
Thank you, Ms. Colbert. I have some ideas for a Hoodoo site parking fee collection initiative. If we were to staff it manually on the roadway, everybody is familiar with the Hoodoo site. If it was to be staffed on the roadway, the approach going in, depending on how many hours a day was deemed feasible, and if we wanted to do it every day or excluded the days the traffic could be slower, we would need 2 staff. If it was considered more, we might need 3. Considering we could train summer students, collecting a minimum wage. So envision them on the road. We'd have some kind of structure, a protective tent, chairs, a cooler or something, so they'd be prepared to spend the day. Collection could be done by cash. There's a system that Daryl's familiar with where it's like an electronic device on your hip where you can, the staff would be trained, and it's a small handheld thing, bigger than a phone, but smaller than a Moneris, Interact machine. Could collect it through that system, can go debit card or credit card, or they could collect cash. There's another system, much simpler, cheaper to get into, and please bear with me because I'm not that, I'm learning, but I'm not that smart. Julie's been a tremendous help to me sorting this out. It's called Square Up, and it's a phone with a, looks like an adapter for a cell phone, yeah. There's 2 things. It punches into the a phone and transfers the data into the phone. You download the app from the company. There's also another one. They have the same company has a Square thing where you can put the card actually in. It maintains records the data, and on an adjacent phone you would enter the cost, and it prompts you. It prompts you through that. They collect 2.65% of all fees collected in total, or 10% if it's a tap and go. And I'm not that familiar, but I understand what that is, a tap and go type transaction. Now, if we were to also provide signage explaining, in a diplomatic but direct way that the Hoodoos are indeed a provincial site. However, the maintenance of the asphalt, the picnic area, and thoughts to improve the washrooms are a municipal initiative. We were to discuss it with Julia, do a bit of an initiative, an info campaign on the town site. Staff at site could hand out a small brochure explaining why we're doing this, and depending on the fee that is collected, we would expect, and we would train staff to be not, just dictatorially collecting money here, to be friendly, explaining to people. They're on holidays, explaining why we're doing this. Yes, it's an extra fee, but this is really a unique site, and help us maintain. And I've seen this many times when I go into the States, very, very similar things, and put across in diplomatic, friendly, agreeable fashion. We would create a policy and a method of where my staff could travel out to the area if there was perhaps excess funds collected, actual cash. We don't want some youth out there walking around with $5 bills or hanging out of his pockets or something, to retrieve that as many times a day as was possible. That's less important if it's the electronic payment. My research indicates that these things can last the length of a day on their battery. I'll be I'll feel better if I actually see that happening, because it would be somewhat difficult out there with. But we could find a way to equip to recharge the batteries in either one of these systems if need be. I was discussing it with the CAO and with Julia. Tentative hours of operation could be starting at 9 or 10 in the morning, going till 8 o'clock at night, perhaps commencing from June to Labor Day. These are just ideas, and again, depending on how much staff we have, will determine. Rather, how we structure the hours determines how much staff. We would anticipate somebody showing up, and then the busier time being anticipated somewhere. I would suspect noon, 11 or noon to 4 or 5, maybe 6 in the afternoon, and overlapping shifts with 2 staff, not to hold up a line and make cause a traffic jam on Highway 10. And we could work out a traffic plan and a safety plan for this, depending on. All costs considered, costs for staff for the summer, just ruminating as we could be in the area of $15,000 to $18,000 for staff, and to buy some equipment, get into these electronic systems, the fee collection system. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm just not that what you call these things, but this electronic fee collection remote. There is the cell phone coverage out there. I did talk to officials at both companies. We don't need a tremendously strong cell phone signal, he said, for this square up system, as it can store data and then download it. It then goes into kind of a cloud maintained by this company. I'm not the most trustworthy individual, but I anticipate everybody. I did speak to one fellow who's listed as a reference, and he says, no, he says, in about a day I get my money, and they deduct their 2.65%. It's then downloaded to us, and then I just spoke briefly with Elin this morning, Elin Gwinner downstairs, about a separate account could be set up where the money is then downloaded into that, and then it's in our possession. Now, as for possible revenue, depending on what we were to charge, if we were to say something where somebody isn't kicking and screaming, it was $3 or $4 to come in, and most people, I mean, as many times as I've driven by there and been out there on issues, for the life of me, I can't really say. I know I've seen cars lined up down the road on a busy summer's day, lined up down the approach road to Highway 10, and then I've been out there, I know, and there's been 2 or 3 cars, again, at a certain time. So I really, not that I didn't think of it, I can't really come up with a solid answer as to what I would consider how many cars may be there at any one time. I do go by some of the numbers we're all familiar with, the number of visitors to the valley in a summer. We would need a bylaw as well. We would have to adopt internal policies, and that's not a big issue. We would, of course, need a bylaw for enforceability and collection of the money. So yeah, I've got some ideas as to how I can envision in my head how we would set it up and how it would work. Julia did speak to one of the vendors that occupies the site in the summertime, and they have no issue with collecting money to get into the site where they would then purchase their goods. They seem to have no concern about that. So that did concern me. Somebody maybe considering that a bar to buying their, to taking part in their service and goods, but apparently that's not a concern of theirs. Yes, I'm happy to answer any questions. And Mr.
Thank you, Greg. Fred?
How would we block access to a provincial site? Is that the bylaw that you were talking about?
No, it wouldn't be so much blocking. It would be a case of, and I stress the word diplomatic, and I stress the word congenial and friendly, and the approach. We would just put a station. We would find out the safest, high visibility spot. Make sure staff is wearing high visibility gear and easily recognized as an employee of the town of Drumheller, just on the road. And we just, how do you say? We could set up a barrier, or we could set up a station that's easily seen. We have that lightweight plastic and white for flood mitigation. We bought it under the flood mitigation grant. set up an area with that, and then the appropriate signage, and then a sign, we considered a sign perhaps out on Highway 10 indicating, something to the effect, if you turn in here, staff on foot, please slow down, something like that effect, to that effect.
So we wouldn't have any issues with the provincial government and access to their site, eh? If somebody drove up, and let's say we get 2 summer students out there in vests, and somebody drove up and said no, then what do we do? What do you do then? They're out there by themselves and somebody says no.
Well, it's
a simple policy,
Yeah.
and it's fine. I mean, what do they call it? The DMFs, the destination marketing fees that are charged by every hotel are actually in this province absolutely optional. And the same is true when the city of Niagara implemented a DMF for their restaurants as well. It was absolutely optional. You know why it made the news? Because one person out of 50,000 a week said, "May I refuse?" And they said no, which was wrong. They should have said yes. So the simple answer is, may I refuse? Yes, you may. On you go. Because it's simply not going to happen that often. When people are presented with a nominal charge for a service they think has value, we're talking about 0.1% is actually going to have the confrontational confidence to say, may I refuse? And at that point, the answer should simply be yes, and on they go. Because we're not talking about a lot. I really don't. I don't see that being the number one issue with this. I see the number one issue with this, Fred, unless you have more.
Jay, the only other question I wanted to ask is, were you thinking this year? What was it?
Yeah, I think we could if we have the money and we can organize it. I think we could get it going this year.
So just for the purpose of, if I could, Your Worship, just for the purpose of the listening public, again, we're only talking about the suspension bridge and the Hoodoo site.
Just the Hoodoo site.
Just the Hoodoo site.
Yeah,
okay.
we would just roll it. We would just introduce it at the Hoodoo site this year
As
to
a
see
pilot?
as a pilot, yeah.
Okay. So I was certainly very discouraged about what the operational and input costs could be for a technology-based service. That it sounded like it was going to, be impractical. Either it was going to be too voluntary to be meaningful, or simply be too expensive to be practical. And so I like that you've explored this idea, Greg, but at the same time, I can honestly say that I didn't view it as a jobs project. And so what you didn't say, even though you were heading down that route, was, can you remind us of the potential revenue projections you had for just that one site? Because unless they're anywhere more than double the 15 to 18K in costs, I don't know why on earth we would do this. This was supposed to be about generating new revenue, not providing a few more jobs to a few more students in town. So I'd need to know for sure that we felt very confident, and I'm not sure that $3 or $4 is, again, I don't know. A marketing consultant could probably tell us a good, I saw us, given that people's low, if we're talking about visiting the, heaven forbid the Twitterverse will explode. When it was even suggested that we do something at the world's largest dinosaur site, given how much time people spend at the spray park and that sort of thing, a fee of several dollars made sense. Given that the average time that someone actually is over at the Hoodoo site, or if we were to extend this to Suspension Bridge, I'd be surprised if the average length of time was more than half an hour. I would think that actually a charge of $2 would be a significantly more realistic ask for the length of time that people are staying in that locale. Unless, of course, we're providing additional things, and so that the picnic area is pleasing enough that people might stay longer, etc. So that's the number that would really help me decide to support the pilot project, is could we feel confident that the revenue projections will far exceed the staffing costs involved.
Lisa?
No, could I get an answer?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I can't give you a good answer,
comment.
Mr. Garbett, on that. I anticipated at the Big Dinosaur, given nominal fees of, or rather nominal numbers of vehicles, it would have been possible, estimating how long, $8,000 to $10,000 a month, possibly, if we instituted But that was with the technological system that, would require significant startup fees. I can't give you a good answer on that.
So does anyone know how many 100 cars a day, how many dozen cars a day we see?
So we know that there's about 200,000 plus visitors there over a given summer, and that information's been surveyed by the province several years ago. Given what it looks like on a typical Saturday afternoon there, you're probably looking in the order of 500 to 1,000 vehicles on a Saturday. I just did very high level numbers and said we're about 50,000 for the summer, right? Considering we have 120 to 150 days in the summer, it's probably, and you're probably Wednesday to Sunday are your busier days. So you're not going to get much on Mondays and Tuesdays, except for on the holiday weekends. So at $2, and that was the number I had written down, that's roughly $100,000, and I put 20 down for an expenses, and so you're looking at $80,000 profit, I guess, for that at $2 a car. So if we're a little bit low on or a little bit high on
I'd
the
even
cars,
be satisfied if we used an average of 4 people per vehicle and took the number down to significant, even if the revenue figure was 50,000 with an expense of around 20. That would be reasonable in terms of expense versus return as far as I'm concerned. So I'm glad to hear that, Daryl. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping for, was that we had some kind of ballpark about what we thought we might be able to make. Not at $3 or $4, because I'm not sure that's a fair ask.
I had written down 2 before Craig had finished, because that's the same thing. For the amount of time you're spending there, $2 is probably a reasonable number. And people aren't going to think twice about $2.
Right. I'm curious. I know it was something that we wouldn't have looked into, and again, it may not be worth it, but any pilot project, if you're successful, then of course you're hoping for it to be expanded upon. And if we were to include would it be possible for us to, at either location, in subsequent years, could we consider that someone would purchase something that would allow them to park at both sites? That they could pay us once and go visit both the suspension bridge and the hoodoos. It's exactly the same reason, exactly the same rationale. Pay one time, and then they would receive something, just a little sticker to put on their dash that says, "I paid to park." And that way we would have probably higher compliance and higher visitorship to both locations as well.
Yeah, I think that, so I don't want to talk about baby steps, but before, I would think it'd be pretty easy to introduce something like that if we found that the first year was successful.
Right, of course.
Yeah, but sure, I mean, the idea that you could actually park anywhere you wanted to in town with this little pass would be great. And by the way, a little map to visit East Cooley and the
I like to begin with the end in mind, so I like to consider the evolution of things if they're successful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lisa.
Well, I'm sure glad to hear some other alternatives on the table. Would any of these students, would we be able to apply for a STEP grant to help offset the staffing cost?
Barb, can you answer that, please?
Yes, we would.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be our expectation. So.
We've already maxed out all our applicants for STEP.
Okay.
Barb, could you just answer that in the speaker, please?
Sorry, we've already applied for our maximum, I believe, for STEP and Canada Summer Jobs, and so they get allocated.
Okay, perfect. My other comment would be, I thought the Tyrrell Museum had Tyrrell, I thought they had visitor numbers. As I had thought at one point in time, about 3 years ago, they actually had people who were on site who were taking some of those numbers. Is that the provincial data that you were referring to?
Yes, yeah, and I think their number, it is the numbers that I'm referring to, and I think their numbers were around 250,000 visitors to the Hooters.
So even more.
Yeah. So again, being conservative with that, but knowing what it looks like there on a weekend in the summertime, it's, I can understand where they get those numbers from. So.
Yeah. And so, do you know if they had information as in regards to peak visitor time at all, or?
I don't know, but we can find out, right? And then that might help us decide when hours we have people. I mean, I think the middle of the day is the busier time, and a lot of people do go in the evening to take sunset shots and things like that, right? But I don't know exactly but we could ask, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. And then just a general comment, I've used the square a number of times at political fundraisers and a golf tournament I threw a couple of years ago, and it was massively handy, quick, fast, and it was just super convenient for people. So
Yeah.
it's a great little piece of technology.
And that's what Hoodoo Hydration use, and they said they have no issues with connectivity or anything. So
Good to hear. Thanks.
Christine?
Okay. Just when I think $2 wouldn't be bad, because when I worked down for the chamber at the dinosaur, that's what they charged for an adult to go up the dinosaur, and essentially they were up there for like 5 seconds. So up, down, that was good. So $2 should be fine. Do we have any idea what we're going to do with the buses when they come in?
Charge them more.
Perfect.
Yeah, you know, and again, I think the idea of this was to see what council thought, right? I don't think we've got down to what color the sign is on the highway for signage on it, right? I would expect that we would probably charge $5 or, you know, $10 for a bus, you know, something bigger, knowing it with the expectation that, you know, it impacts the parking lot and everything else a lot more, not just simply the numbers of people that could be on the bus, but it's more about the impact to our site out there. So, but we haven't got that far yet.
Tom?
Yeah, a couple things. So the intent of collecting money is to pay for the refurbishing of the parking lot and
Yes, yes, to pay
the
for
washrooms and that kind of thing.
capital improvements out there. So
And how much was that estimated to be?
the washrooms themselves were about 60,000. Parking lot improvements were in the neighborhood of $120,000, and that number might be even a bit light depending on how much we do. So we're probably looking at order of around $200,000 if we wanted to get everything done on our list.
So we would take this money collected and put it in a capital reserve for that purpose, or how would that work?
What I think we would do is after the first year determine the success of it, and then figure out how long it would take to do some of these improvements, and then probably, and maybe it's a combination of debt financing with a capital payback on it, or just keep the money in reserve and then do a project when you have the money in the bank. So, you know, certainly I think from everyone's perspective, both of those are high priority concerns. You know, safety concerns in the parking lot, especially with all the big buses and motorhomes and stuff turning around. Aesthetically with the washrooms out there. So I can see both of those wanting to be done sooner, not later. So,
Christine?
That totally reminded me of a question. So somebody asked me about the size of the parking lot and saying, would we actually be increasing the size so there could be more parking or better access for the buses? And that would be a definite yes?
Yes, yeah, that's the plan. There's definitely a plan in place. We've asked the province to see if they're willing to help us with that. But we've raised that as a issue that we need to make that parking lot larger, because I don't know if it was ever designed for large recreational vehicles, whether it be buses or motorhomes or trailers. So,
Anybody else? Shay?
So are you looking for direction, Daryl, on a thumbs up, thumbs down to a pilot project, or?
yes, yeah, okay.
So based on the information today, yeah, I'm comfortable with saying yes.
Anybody else? Yeah, and I think the great thing about this pilot project is the fact that it's an ambassador program, so that we can get people to East Cooley and get people back into Drum and Waynefest and all that stuff. So I think on that side of it, it's huge. And as well, sorry, I lost him. Anyways. Okay.
So you're absolutely right about the ambassador part, because the expectation would be that you're providing them with a visitor enhancement experience to say, by the way, you're here, do you know it's about 4 kilometers to go to the East Cooley School Museum or to the coal mine or anywhere else, just to kind of help people along. And I know in talking, Julie and I had mentioned that, or had heard that last week from Hoodoo Hydration, had said the same thing. So,
Well, that's what I wanted to tell you guys. And just for the record, I sent another letter to Minister Ricardo today, just focusing strictly on the safety of the Hoodoos and the concern about buses backing up and stuff down that road. So hopefully at that point, they also take this into account. Christine?
I wanted to say I was also in support of the pilot project. I think when Facebook and everything blew up, it was just a little thing, and once people started to realize exactly what we were going to have to charge to get this parking lot fixed and stuff, I think a lot of people were a little bit more happy with it from what I've heard. So I think it's good.
Fred?
I'm on board the way we've discussed it so far. Just make it safe. And
All right, you got direction? Okay, let's move on to 4.1.1. Daryl?
so Greg's going to talk about the public behavior bylaw, and then I'll talk about the tourism corridor bylaw. So,
Thank you. We have put together a short, we've excised, or we will excise, if the bylaw is eventually passed, certain parts of the public behavior bylaw that would cover parts when I briefed council on the changes to the community standards. Sections of that, specifically 16, 17, 18, that dealt with loitering, fighting, bullying. They would be excised and put into this bylaw. This is a compilation of what we considered some of the better ideas that are out there. Municipalities are putting forward, and there are numerous ones in Alberta regarding just this very thing, public behaviors, focusing on bullying, consumption of cannabis, fighting, loitering, spitting, urinating, and the last one there, and tobacco consumption. This is a draft that has not yet been reviewed by Colin Clute and completely. I've gone over it, but there are things with it that I am not, that I would like to change. Some wording, some wordsmithing, some terminology. The impetus being that these are issues, I think it was mentioned by Councillor Garb at the previous meeting, these are issues faced by citizens and business owners that may not be, and nothing against the RCMP, but may not be attached to significant effort to respond to a concern. Some of these are dealt with in the criminal code. As I've discussed, bullying is most often an assault of some kind. Loitering is very often part of causing a disturbance under the criminal code if you go through the several sections of the criminal code that talks about cause of disturbance. We deal, the peace officers in the municipal enforcement of the town of Drumheller do have the authority to enforce the Provincial Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act, which does cover the deposit already of human waste, whatever form. We do have that authority. I understand the message council would like to put across by the adoption of a bylaw such as this. And we would fall back on, if you look at specifically the cannabis and tobacco consumption, there are already provincial rules in place, such as distance from 5 meters from a doorway for smoking. And if you go to, and I brought them all for cross-reference, because you have to go through sometimes 2 or 3 of the provincial acts to get the answer you would like. When you look simply as somebody was to say, can I smoke marijuana in public? And the answer is kind of, you bounce between the Gaming and Liquor Act and Cannabis Act, the seeds at one part, back to the Tobacco Reduction Act, and then the Tobacco Reduction Act, the seeds to the regulation regarding the distance. One may, before one is in violation of the law. So, as I said, there are some changes. I'm not, section 3.05, that needs to be reworded. A person referred to in section 3.04, for example, must on demand of a peace officer produce a copy of their, and that's awkward wording, their authorizing medical documentation. We change that to something for the next review that authorizes possession and consumption for medicinal purposes, something along those lines. Section 3.09 regarding spitting, urinating, and defecation. It says right in the header about defecating, but the wording talks about human waste, and that's just when the draft was typed out. I'm not taking credit for a disaster, but that's incorrect. That wording would have to be changed. The powers of a peace officer is the section part 4 and part 5. Or rather point 4.02, I believe, are standard and standard authorities that I've sought with the concurrence of Colin Clute and the CAO in all bylaws, that we have a hand in writing, so we have a standard and enforcement clause that doesn't bounce around different from one bylaw to the next. We do not have, sometimes in dealing with people that are fighting or other things, we do not have an express under the peace officer, just a small bit of trivia, under the peace officer provisions, we do not have criminal code authority to arrest people. However, there is a residual, basically citizen's power of arrest that any one of us in this room has. And the provisions of that I understand pretty well. If it was a case where we did break up, just as an example for council to consider, we broke up a fight or we broke up somebody who's loitering and refused to, agree to our advice to move along, or we could detain these people and immediately call the RCMP quite lawfully if it needed to go further than just our, asking somebody who's smoking illegally and we give them a ticket and please move along, here's your ticket, or something. If there was grounds, for an arrest, we can lawfully detain people momentarily while we're not just dealing with it ourselves or transport it. We would then call the RCMP and then take it further from there.
Lisa?
Just got a few things here. 4.02. Maybe I'm just having a brain fart, or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 6 months or both. Is that standard for a municipality? Imprisonment?
It's in many bylaws, yes. It's an absolute opportunity, or rather, of last resort. It would rarely come up, but I think, and again, I'm not advocating harsh punishment or being difficult, but I think it's an option that needs to be maintained for the absolute worst case scenarios, that there's no other option that comes up and you must have this.
Gotcha.
And again, it would never, my time with the town, which is over 6 years now, I don't think anybody's ever gone, except momentarily, in the custody of the RCMP for a warrant that they haven't dealt with, or a bylaw violation that has gone to a warrant through the provincial court, and they've been detained momentarily or a few hours waiting on justice of the peace. But nobody has, and I don't anticipate that, but I think those options need to be maintained, just so the municipality has the option for the worst of the worst of the worst.
Gotcha. I just always assume that's
and I'm not advocating, Mrs. Zachary, I'm not advocating harsh punishment. I'm just saying it's an option I think that needs to be maintained.
Okay. My other comment is under the spitting, urinating, and defecate. Have we ever addressed animal waste rather than just human waste?
It's in the pet owner's bylaw.
Okay, yeah. Gotcha. Just want to make sure, because I hear so many complaints about animal defecation that.
No, and okay. There are times where somebody will call up and they'll say, sometimes they don't know the person or the dog, and often though they say it's so-and-so's and not even know the name of the dog, and they did this and they didn't, and it could be problematic prosecuting them, but we will follow up and speak to those people and warn them about the need to pick up after their animals. People know that. People just choose to ignore it a lot of the time. Because I do hear not just cats and dogs, but horses or whatnot that are going through the town of Drumheller. So no, but if we receive the information in a complaint and we have something to follow up on, we do. It doesn't often always end up in a charge, but we will follow up for purposes of educating or informing the public, or that we are taking action with whatever action we can take with the information we have. Perfect. And the other one, I just
general comment for perhaps discussion in regards to bullying. What methods would there be available to address online or cyberbullying? With
That
youth
would
or
most
whatnot in
likely
our
should go to the
community?
RCMP.
Okay.
Twice, I think, in my time, initially as the bylaw supervisor, I've had conversations with the Crown prosecutor who was looking for a very less dangerous, not the right word, less serious option, but to convict someone for an assault or something, and it being children, being repeat offenders. And I said, well, we have the option in the bylaw of ticketing for bullying. It's technically an assault, but it is here, and it does cross over. It can cross over into problematic areas if it's not administered properly. So that has come up where we have given the option of pleading guilty to reduce it to the point to still get the message across. So if somebody faces a sanction, but it's not enters in the criminal realm.
I gotcha. I was just saying, or thinking to myself, public place. Well, I mean, it's defined here, but does that adequately cover if need to? Like if the principal calls you on a late Friday afternoon and the RCMP are out busy, is there a mechanism that we could use to send bylaw over to help deal with a
Well, no, we would never
issue?
turn anybody away if they had an issue. We often look at things that need to go to the RCMP, but initially come to us. And I would never turn anybody away that had a complaint, or if we could look at it even just for the sheer hope of assuaging somebody's fears or concerns, or a parent calling up. And people still call me because they know I was a police officer, and they seek advice sometimes. So no, we never would do that, but sometimes we take it as far as we can, and we realize we can't take it any further. It's a matter for the RCMP. So I would never ever turn anybody away that had a concern, if for no other reason than just being a citizen on the earth and giving you some advice as to how you should, whether I have the authority or not. And I explain that we don't, but oftentimes these things enter, they need a investigational resource that I don't have
Gotcha.
to deal with.
Thanks.
Jay?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Greg, for putting this together. I'm pleased to see this covers the things that come out of the community standards bylaw. Just a couple of quick questions before, but a comment would be that I'm always pleased to see whenever we're taking the best practice of pulling from multiple jurisdictions and making a compilation of what we think the best ideas out there that are already in force elsewhere. So thank you for doing that. First off, just wanted to, for my own edification, the rationale for leaving the public consumption of alcohol not included here is because it's handled entirely under the criminal code?
No, public consumption of liquor is under the gaming and liquor.
Oh, okay.
Which we have authority to enforce.
Excellent. So it doesn't
Yes.
need to be included in this, it's elsewhere?
No, we have authority under
Okay.
the gaming, liquor, and cannabis law.
Gotcha. So when we're talking about, obviously on this fine schedule, the fines are significant in most cases. So it's fair to say that we're trying to alter behavior through penalty. It does make me wonder what the rationale is for why the fines for cannabis and tobacco infractions are so low in comparison to the other fines. Is there a rationale?
Yeah, no, I don't have other than that was what we largely see. And that was tobacco. Yeah, tobacco and, yeah, I don't have Mr. Garr, but we were just trying to reflect what was already in place under provincially for the tobacco consumption and when we put that onto the cannabis. But again, it's not set in stone already. It's just a draft. And
yeah, for sure. That's why I was asking. So
yeah.
if there is no solid rationale, that's when it comes before us for first reading. I'd like to hear more about a rationale for keeping that fine as low as it is. It's difficult to imagine for someone who decided to push the issue that in comparison to the extreme rates that subsequent offenses would result in for fines and the other infractions in this bylaw, that tapping out, maxing out at $100 might not be the penalty that would alter behavior for someone who's decided to show us their zealotry around why they have the right to consume these things in public in their minds.
yeah, we were just reflecting. I'm not making excuses. We were
Yeah, for
reflecting
sure.
what the tobacco.
So when it comes back for first reading, I'd like to hear either there's a really good reason why, or I'd like to see a third offense at a significantly higher fine.
Christine?
It was just a quick question. I think you sort of touched on it. Did you say the RCMP is responsible for collecting the fines? Is that what you said, or a warrant goes out?
No, Mr. Mott. If we write for these, we have the authority to use the provincial offense tickets, which is the same as the RCMP uses. We just put on there, we have a box we check, we put municipal bylaw, and we write in the section number for the municipal bylaw. No, that is all processed through the provincial system. I mentioned about warrants. There are times where we will write a bylaw ticket on the provincial ticket, which the provincial law and the municipal bylaw supports, and we can lawfully do that. And the person just won't pay it, and it will go on the summons portion, it will go to a warrant, which is then issued by the courthouse, and then we will ask the RCMP. Most of the time, if the odd one we get, I phone the person up and I say to them, please come in and take care of this, and they either go to the courthouse or they surrender themselves at the RCMP detachment, and it's dealt with there. We do come across the odd warrant of committal, but that's after a person has already been found guilty and they owe the money, and basically they're arrested on that warrant, and it's basically straight to incarceration until the fine is paid.
Fred?
Greg, can you tell me if there's any way that we could add a subheading for squatting and camping on town property and vagrancy? Like, we've had some issues this year with the traveling people that we move from one spot to another spot and it ends up being somebody else's problem. I think that we should add something in there that addresses that to a point that we have some teeth in that legislation, so we don't just move them from one place to another place and make it someone else's problem, because I understand that problem is now moved to another part of the community. So
we often have the authority to deal with squatters through the trespassing, through the provincial law on trespassing. What somebody does, I'm not making excuses, but if we deal with them as far as we can take it on an incident and they move somewhere else, that's what happened with at least one individual, and we follow up and go deal with them at that spot. Once we deal with them at one spot, it's very hard to say what they're going to do next, and I'm not,
Do you know what I'm not clear on what the definition of a vagrant is, but would they fall into that category? And if so, could we create that so that travels with them, so we don't, each time they move 10 feet down the block, we don't have to start the process again?
Right.
It follows them?
Mr. Wacky, vagrancy is a difficult thing because it used to be part of the criminal code, and it was taken out just from the time I started being a police officer, because it was considered to be discriminatory law based on somebody's means in the world. Vagrancy was looked upon as it's not against the law to be poor. It is against your conduct can be against the law. It's not,
Well, then,
and that's why it was taken out. Sorry.
Then my choice of words is wrong then. But could we look and see whether there's something that we could incorporate? Obviously, it's a problem. It could repeat itself. It is repeating itself. And something in here, bylaw-wise, that would address that, so that once and for all we have a solution to that, if we could.
No, I'll certainly look at it. I don't know if it's once and for all we're going to have a solution to such problems, but I'll be happy to look at it. But I do say we do have authority under the Trespass to Property Act, under the provincial law.
The problem with the Trespass Act is they'll move on somebody's property who'll give them permission to camp, and they'll carry on their illegal activities from there, and that doesn't solve the problem. We've just moved the problem around. So I don't know. Right. I don't know how to solve it, but I see what the problem is, but I don't know what the solution is.
Just a comment on yours, Fred. So if I invite you onto my property, and then you're doing something illegal, we're jointly responsible for that, right? So if people are moving around, if you're a willing participant in allowing someone on your property, now you're accepting some of that responsibility. So it's hard to be able to tag an individual or a group of people and say, well, you can't go on anyone's property anymore. You must now leave town or go somewhere else. It's a bit of a challenge legally to do that.
Would it fall under community standards and say you can't really camp in town?
Well, you're trying to fit a definition or a couple of clauses to a specific group of individuals, right? Because if anything, you'd say, well, you can't. How do you differentiate between me throwing a pop-up tent trailer on my driveway versus me inviting someone who may not be and you haven't seen my relatives, they can be rowdy. So like some other people might have something similar to that, right? So it's a bit of a challenge, and that's why it's best handled by the police, because they have a variety of tools at their disposal that I think it'd be difficult with trying to create bylaws for those specific ones. So I hear what you're looking for, but I just think you have to differentiate between people who willingly allow friends and neighbors to camp versus, hey, somebody.
Fair enough. If we
so.
leave that out of it, if we can have some way that if they're on public property of dealing with them in this type of way.
Public's completely different. Yeah, public property's completely different.
Well, then that should be looked at, because as far as I'm concerned, that's as serious as bullying or public defecation or anything.
And we already have that in a trespassing, right? So I think the problem is that they've gotten permission in the past from, or maybe quote unquote permission from private landowners to be on their property. And then it's as I described, right? You're allowing, if I'm inviting you on my property now, I have to be responsible for that, so.
Tom?
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to mention, I'm wondering if we could or should or can, or whether it is even already covered, declare what I call a safety zone, or you could call it maybe a no access area, where we would not allow vehicles or people in that area. So I'm just wondering if this is covered in the special events permit, that when we issue a special events permit for a block party barbecue or whatever, does it say anywhere in that special events permit that area is designated as, my phrase, a safety zone or a no vehicle area or anything like that? I'm kind of wondering about the Festival of Lights, for example. I mean, we block off all downtown. Is there any special way that we designate that area, that we do not allow vehicles in there at that time, during that particular time? And do we enforce that? So I'm also kind of thinking, maybe it's in the assembly part of this, or maybe it's in the loitering part of this. But I'm also thinking of so our parade committee. So we're looking at the July 1st parade, and we're hoping to possibly have much less traffic, people on the pavement, on the streets. And so if we could somehow designate during that period of time that street is what we call a safety zone for authorized people only, then that might be a way that we could enforce people being on the street who shouldn't be there, creating a way that it is not safe. So I don't know if this covers it in any way, or whether our special events permit speaks to that kind of thing in any way, that we have some way of enforcing that this area at this time, no vehicles. And somebody drives a vehicle through there, well, what do we do? Or this area at this time, no unauthorized people. And if somebody goes in there, what do we do? So I'm just wondering if that could be in there, or...
This doesn't address vehicular traffic, Mr. Zariski.
Okay.
The loitering is just that, a person's physical presence, for perhaps reasons that are unclear in a certain location, in front of a store, a school, something like that. For a parade, I was doing some research last week about parade safety. There are many policies across North America that deal with parade safety, and some instituted since the unfortunate accident that caused the death of a child last year in Nova Scotia, I believe. As for oftentimes in the permission letter from the CAO regarding events that are in place and need this suspension or the what's the proper word there, of a bylaw temporarily, so this event can take place. There is instructions, clear instructions that go in there for people, what they should or should not be doing. The safety with floats, for example, in a parade, and not to sound corny, but to rain on anybody's parade or sound like a wet blanket, I think we really need to assign persons that maintain the custody or perimeter on that float. Perhaps an idea I see over and over again in parades is that no float shall have less than 4 people, one at each corner, assigned to security for it. And I know there's some diehard opinions that want to, I know it's a festive atmosphere, but throwing candy and the kids running onto the street, in my opinion, it has been proven, and there's been other accidents as well in North America at parades, is a really hazardous endeavor. But I think if we address, it's going to be hard to keep people. I mean, we can put barricades up. We can have, one issue came up with, could the RCMP provide security? Well, the RCMP is not going to have the manpower or the lady power, to enforce the entire perimeter of the parade. So can we educate the public in a better fashion to be safe? And can we institute a more sound practices with the floats or going through the route to advocate for a safer environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And our parade committee is talking about all of that stuff. The question basically came up is, so we will have many volunteers helping out this year with the parade. We've had lots of people step up and say, yeah, I'll help out with the security, with the marshalling, with the helping out. And so if we have these people marshalling an area and they're keeping people off of the street, and somebody says, well, no, I don't want to get off the street. Make me. So then what do we do? And so what I'm thinking is, well, if we have the special events permit for the parade, and it does say on the street during the parade, only authorized people will be on the street. Then we have some method of maybe enforcing this situation, of telling this person who doesn't want to get off the street that I'm afraid you are, infringing on the bylaw, and you can be fined, if you don't. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying.
Give it a little bit of teeth there.
Yeah. But oftentimes, without somebody confronting them on the spot, such as myself or a police officer, some people aren't going to move, right? It could be a well-meaning parade volunteer telling them this.
Yes.
And sometimes certain people had a bit to drink, or they get a bit of bravado.
So at that point,
then
a police officer is called, or a bylaw officer is called. Yes.
Call one of us, exactly, yeah.
But I think we have to start with this, making sure that this is serious, that we're talking safety, and you are not allowed in this area.
Yeah. I think we can take this off, right? This is, I think that's good discussion. I think we're needing to take that back and look at a couple of, I mean, I can picture 4 people in beret outfits with semi-automatic weapons at every, so. All right. Wasn't that discussed last week, Tom? No, just kidding.
Okay, any other further comments on that? All right, let's move on to 4.1.2, Daryl.
Okay, so hopefully you can bring everybody up a little bit, not into the, so tourism corridor property standards. So this is supposed to enhance the community standards bylaw. Community standards bylaw is meant for all properties within the corporate limits of Drumheller. Tourism corridor is where we've looked at the ability to have a higher level of standard for those areas that are our primary tourist visitor destination throughout the community. So for purposes of this, it's talked about, there's 2 areas, priority area 1 and priority area 2. Priority area 1 is basically from the South Hill on Highway 9 and through town and onto 838 to the end of Midland. And so basically the road, if you were coming from the penitentiary and going to the museum. So that, but it ends, priority area 1 ends at the west edge of Midland, and then from that to the museum is priority area 2. Priority area 1 includes the downtown area, so from 1st Street East to, I think it's 3rd Street West, if I'm not mistaken, or do we go 4th Street West, and along 3rd and Riverside and Railway, so kind of the downtown area, as well as Highway 10 to the edge of 19th Street is primary area 1, plus the piece in Rosedale itself, and then everything else is priority area 2. And we've done that because priority area 2, generally a bit more rural land, different levels with expectation of cutting of grass heights and stuff like that. So the idea behind this is to be able to, again, to make sure there's a higher standard of care for some of the properties that are along those areas. We've had this reviewed by, we actually met with Colin this afternoon about it. One of the things we've done in here is made sure we haven't put stuff in here that is hard to enforce. We're going to be I shouldn't say impossible to enforce, or difficult to communicate to the public. One of the comments that, to quote Colin, is that we really have to do a good job if this is something that the council wants to go forward with. We have to do a really good job of communicating to the public, especially the users along those corridors, about the intent and meaning of it, and not be basically arbitrary and hard on folks who may not have the abilities to manage their properties. So just go through a couple of highlights in here. So part 3, care of premises, unsightly premises. So basically what we are looking to do in here is that, and I should also say that what we're looking in here is to be able to do things. Some of it is very similar expectation that anyone has for community standards, except the timeline's been shortened. So where some places might have 2, 3, or 4 weeks or 2 weeks, these are shortened to a much shorter time because we want to make sure that people are compliant with what we're asking for on it. So if we have any, basically, if we have anything related to building material that's just left behind, derelict equipment, we're giving people 2 weeks to kind of clean it up from the moment we give them an order. If there's any, and we basically want things that aren't storage areas to not be storage areas. So if you really want to keep a bunch of building material on your site, but it's a commercial food store, for instance, then we're going to say that's not something that's part of your core business, so it has to be removed. So under waste collection, excuse me, what we're basically saying in here is that we want to make sure that you're actually taking care of the waste that's generated on your property, and making sure it doesn't blow around. So your carts have to have lids. If your garbage container's got a lid, you're not allowing people to scatter that material about. There's a regular collection on it, and you can't you can't just let the material just lie there. It has to be contained. It has to be dealt with on a regular basis. One of the first bigger changes in here is grass, trees, and weeds. So 3.09, we want to make sure that for priority area 1, that from Victoria to Labor Day, so during the peak summer time, that the grass has to be maintained to a standard of about 15 centimeters, so which is about 6 inches in height. So generally, that gives you the ability that if you had if it rained for a few days in a row and you didn't have a chance to get out and cut it, you still have the ability that you're not going to be out of compliance if you leave it for 10 days after that. So most grass is generally at about the 100 millimeter height or 10 centimeter height. So this is, again, it's allowing for that. I didn't get a chance because I was away or it rained before you cut it. So we want to make sure that Anyone, 310 is about making sure that everything's trimmed and removed once we give you a notification. So you have 7 days to comply with the order to trim and remove any vegetation that's on your property. So, and again, this is mostly for dead trees and stuff that doesn't look very good on the property. So 311 is about making sure that all of your yard waste, so that yard waste is defined as any of your winter materials, so your excess grass, leaves, etc., is all removed before Victoria Day. So again, so it's all cleaned up, ready to go for the community's. This gives you a few weeks after the normal spring cleanup is done, so it should be adequate time in there. So. The next few talk about trees and planting of trees and trimming of trees, and just the expectation that we have for people with respect to trees and other landscaping on the town property, as well as on their own property. So, one of the things of note at 314, the town's landscaping policy. So when properties are developed, they are, as part of the development permit process, they're all told to follow a landscaping policy within the town, and many of them are submit landscaping plans as part of their development permit application, so it's basically adherence to that. So, repair and maintenance of building and fences. So again, kind of the keys for this thing is that making sure that everything looks in good repair for the summertime, so that we're not having fences that are knocked over in the summertime and nothing being done to them. So the expectation again is that if we determine anything's not in proper repair, that we're going to give you a notice and you must repair the work within 7 days, and it's to the satisfaction of the development officer. So, and I should have prefaced by saying there are absolutely some grammatical and numbering errors in here, so don't worry about that stuff from a comment standpoint, but just overall, just wanted to bring that up. Another one, 318, we don't want people to use plywood to board windows and doors up for more than a 7-day period. So the idea is that if your window is smashed out, you can use plywood or something to cover it for a week or so while you're getting a new window put in, but we don't want it to become now a permanent fixture. So, Lisa?
Just coming from the insurance industry, I know it's quite standard that it can take upwards of a month to 2 months to have windows repaired. So I'm hoping that a little bit of lenience will be used in this case in those situations.
Yeah, I think that if someone says that they've got an order coming and it's going to be 2 weeks or 3 weeks, then absolutely. It's more about the ones that aren't doing anything about it and have just replaced their window with, and really, for all intents and purposes, it's not the places that are occupied and fully functional businesses. It's usually the ones that are underused, perhaps vacant, where people have just decided to use plywood as opposed to replacing the windows. And of course, it looks just terrible in the community. So, and 319 is talking about doing, and this is primarily in the downtown area, but again, anywhere, that we want to make sure that the buildings don't look really vacant. So the ability to kind of dress up your window frames. So, working with other retailers to put a display in your empty window of their products, or putting up posters to advertise community events. Again, just the idea that you don't want to have just a bare looking building inside if you can dress it up a little bit. So, and some of these we had I'll talk about it in a second. It's okay. 320 is talking about fences on construction sites. So any of those kind of metal fences that are there, temporary construction. So if they're there that for a long period of time, that they're screened from the street so that you don't actually see it. It's very common to do that. If you're there for a few weeks while you're doing work and you're there all the time, we're not asking for that, but more about if you're actually doing something over months and months, and we do have a few examples of that in town already. So, oh, sorry, Lisa. Sorry. Sure. Yeah. No. This is yeah.
So, just as an example, the city of Airdrie has the beautiful plywood fences that have artwork on them. Is there any way to implement some sort of structures rather than just a plain Jane
So I
middle
think,
ones?
again, it depends on the fences and it depends on the, when I've seen that, and I'm not saying that it's different in this case, but usually it's a long project.
Long-term,
Someone's
yep.
doing something for months and months and months and months. So that would be part of the development permit processes where you'd actually tell them that that's what you want at the beginning. This is more for someone's doing a bit of work on their place.
Gotcha.
And it's taking longer than expected. We want to make sure that it's covered off so that it doesn't look like just chain link fence. So, yeah. But Christine?
Sorry, just a really quick question about the vacant buildings looking like there's somebody in them. We're only sticking this to the summer. We're not going to try to branch that over into shoulder seasons at all for people that maybe close down during the winter?
I think we want to make sure that it's absolutely in this time. There have been a few in downtown that have actually kept them up for much longer than that. So the goal would be to try to work with the businesses to be able to do it over a longer period. But we're saying that it must be in the summer piece. So, yeah. Jay?
Are you done here? Because I can wait till you're done.
No, I mean, we can go through this. Okay, all right, good. All right, graffiti abatement. So graffiti is not kind of, and I think we had this discussion about graffiti before. So graffiti is something that's an unwelcome addition to your property, as opposed to you hiring an artist to do something that might be, maybe a little bit different looking than what is expectation. So the idea is that anything has graffiti on it is removed within 2 days of being notified by the bylaw officer, peace officer. So signage, some of the signage piece is really out of the land use bylaw. So we already do some of these things. So really some of the keys for this is, 324 is about putting signage on town roads. So this would be the little A-frame signage or some of the posters of, I buy cheap houses or things like that. So that's the stuff that we want to be able to control better than what we have right now. And again, some of that is actually already done by Alberta Transportation, but this is, again, the ability to do it on our own roads. 324 talks about if a business has ceased operations, the sign must be removed within 2 weeks, or the signage, and that the owner's responsible for that cost. So that's actually right in our land use bylaw already. So it's just basically an enhancement of that. So, but it has not been adhered to very well at all. And so the expectation is that we start to enforce that a lot more. So, and that all signage that is installed, modified, erected, moved, etc., has permission before it's actually done. Because again, we tend to see that, especially in the downtown area, we want to talk about having more of a look and feel down there. And so we want to be able to make sure that we're working with our property owners and tenants to be able to develop something that is actually aesthetically pleasing and meets the expectation of the downtown. But it's not just there, it's other places as well. So littering, this is basically 327's, the expectation is that the owners or occupiers, anyone that sells food, refreshments, or tobacco products, making sure that their properties are all cleaned up at the end of every day so that there isn't no garbage blowing around through other areas. So 328 we actually have to remove because we according to Colin, have no ability to really enforce this at all. And in part because, so the idea of this is that if you have a gravel parking lot, that you have to be able to track. You can't track mud or stuff onto the town roads. Challenge with that is that in often cases the gravel parking lot's adjacent to a gravel lane, which is now adjacent to a paved lane, and so it's a matter of, again, trying to be reasonable in enforcing it, knowing that you probably will have a very low success rate in enforcing something like that. So his recommendation was to remove it. So. And then 329 is basically no one's allowed to sweep litter or place dirt on the road or on the sidewalk. So making sure that you clean up after yourself on your properties. And then the rest of it is pretty much the duplication of what Greg talked about earlier. We do have a few things. There's a few pieces with appeals under the Weed Control Act, and then some of the bylaw infraction notices. So, and that's it. for me.
Jay?
Thank you, Your Worship. Long time coming, this work. Thank you for bringing it forward. I think it's probably imperative, and I'm not sure you did mention it, Daryl, right from the start, but for those listening at home, that this is the work product of a committee of members of the public that came together to advise us on what they wanted to see. So, you know, I think councils that I've served on have, for a number of years, talked about how do we raise the standard for people who are living and working on First Impression Street. And so this is the fruition of all those discussions, but I think it's important that the public be aware right from the start that this we engage the community immediately. That being said, I do want to know, are any of the people who serve in the committee actually directly affected by this bylaw?
Yes, Jay. And actually, and good point, I was going to mention that when I said I'll wait till the end. And yeah, so there was a committee, a cross-section of members in there. On this committee, there were a number of business owners who either occupy and or own property right along the tourism corridor. So they absolutely have their involvement was key from my perspective because they live and breathe this stuff every day. So I believe we had 9 members, and I would say, off the top of my head, there's at least 7 of those folks actually were or could be directly impacted by this. So,
excellent.
They have some skin in the game for sure. So.
Excellent. You've already mentioned the increased need for education around the prospective bylaw. I understand, of course, it's customary for us to go through first reading before engaging in the typical public consultation. But could we talk some more about what we're going to do given the increased need to engage those who live and work on the affected streets? What are we planning other than the typical making people aware they have 2 weeks to let us know how they feel? Are we going about having open houses? Are we going to directly solicit the input from those people who will be directly affected by this bylaw?
So we're going to do both the open houses, just because it does give a good cross section for people to kind of talk about what they see that they like or dislike. But we also are doing a targeted campaign to everyone that's along or within those confines of the corridor, just to let them know that, by the way, here are some changes, point them to the draft bylaw for them to be able to review it and offer their comments to us. And if need be able to meet with them in small groups to try to facilitate any of the concerns that they might have, that come up with something that works for everybody. So,
I know that we have remedies in place that are all financial in terms of penalty to deal with situations of non-compliance. But given the number of residential properties that will be affected, by the time this comes to first reading, I'd like to know about what sort of, if any, programming will be invented or referred to or related, given the number of residential properties where the ability to physically comply with some of the landscaping requirements would be very difficult on these people.
The landscaping part, I mean, it's interesting because it primarily deals with commercial and industrial properties, not residential as much. But I think, and if I'm not mistaken, probably am, there's about 30 to 35 properties that are residential along that tourism corridor, or at least the primary part of it, priority 1. So again, they'd be part of that consultation. I think some of those properties are just fantastic, and some of them we need to be able to help them.
Absolutely, that's what I'm hoping for, is a way to help them, because I'm thinking about a particular block that we could throw a rock from and hit from here. That is often an issue around eyesores, and yet simply finding and or sending bills for the work that we complete on their behalf is not going to solve the problem, because they're not in a position. Well, just like they're not in a position to physically do the work themselves, they may not be in a position to pay. And so I'm glad that we're going to consider alternatives for those locations.
Yeah, and really, when we had the discussion with Colin this afternoon, we came to that same realization in a few of those, is that we're probably going to have to step in to do some of the work and then figure out how we're going to be able to help them pay for that or contribute to that work that's being done. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Brad?
Thanks for this, Daryl, and everybody that worked on it. I have a couple questions. I know that it's been brought up to me on numerous occasions, the weeds in the ditch on the way to the museum, you know, along the commercial properties in the school and stuff like that. Will this address that, or is that still the highway's responsibility? From the fence to the roadway.
So from the fence to the edge of the road is highway's responsibility to do.
Okay.
But part of the consultation piece is that we've already talked to highways about the fact that this and the community standards bylaw are being revised and coming forward. So the idea is that we work with them to try to again ensure success by having them do some. It might just mean in some areas that they're going to have to do 2 mowings a year instead of 1 mowing a year.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. I'm also, and it happens to be, and I wish it wasn't what I get involved in in my other job, but 3.23, Section 1 and Section 2, I am absolutely confused. Every person shall apply for and obtain a building permit before constructing, repairing, erecting, allowing, installing, placing, moving, rebuilding, reconstructing, or altering a sign. Despite the sentence, a permit is not required for changing or repairing the lettering of a sign or internal. I don't understand that.
Yeah, and actually, again, I mentioned that there were some.
Okay, so that one's going to be tweaked.
Yeah, it's already been
done then. Yeah. I'm out of here.
Christine?
I'm just curious. So, of course, we're asking the business owners and everybody that lives along the corridor to try to keep everything up and maintained and looking nice. Are we going to put priority to these areas in terms of things that we as a town have to take care of, like the sidewalks and the roads, or are they going to become on the forefront for us, or how's that going to work?
So the road, we have been working with Alberta Transportation on the road side, so they're responsible everywhere. That's a priority 1 area outside of downtown is all provincial highway responsibility. So they've been doing some work every year. We've been over the last year, for instance, we replaced a bunch of sidewalk in front of the Quality Inn, Canadian Tire area. So that's still our expectation that we move on. We continue on with our beautification and our cleanup of it. So so the last thing we want to do is to be able to point fingers at other people when our own house doesn't look great. So,
Lisa?
Thanks for this. So I do have one comment in regards to Schedule B. The only comment would be that in regards to failure to remove graffiti, I personally feel that perhaps that's a little bit high considering it is a third party that's damaging somebody else's property. And you do have a small quarter or time frame to have it to be fixed. And I mean, if you're talking about getting spray painted in winter, it might not be so easy. I thought maybe it probably should be more in line with waste collection infraction.
I think one of the keys in there is that 2 days of being notified by a peace officer. So the idea is that I would hope you would probably see that first. And again, the expectation isn't to stand there and have a ticket, and a clock to say, oh, you're 2 minutes over your 2 days. I'm gonna. The idea is to work with them first. So, but you still have to have something in there that's reasonable. And if we, if council believes that 2 days is too much, then we can change it to whatever we think. I think that it's just more of something that can be easily remedied, so it shouldn't drag on for too long. So,
well, I guess it all depends on the scope, right? I mean, you look at the car wash that was on the corner across from Winks or the Mac store there. It had significant graffiti all the way down the side of the business, which would take substantial cost to get that fixed, to get color matched and everything else. And it took quite a long time for that business to actually have that repaired. Do I feel that on a first offense, a $500 ticket is too high for something like that? Yeah, I do. And I think, on a first offense, $250, and the fact that they're going to fix it, and, I think that's a good enough penalty to say, hey, we're serious here, no smarten up.
Okay, good point. Yep, can take that.
Tom?
Yeah, I was just wondering where in the bylaw deals with brownfields. I know in our magical mystery tours, when we toured up and down the valley a couple of times with the bus, we go around Drumheller, and I don't think most people in Drumheller realize how many brownfields we have. I mean, it's just numbers and numbers of them down every road. And some are well taken care of. I mean, the prime example, of course, is Munchie Park. That was a notorious brownfield, and it now looks very, very good. We do have other brownfields that don't look so good. And I'm thinking of the one that has big concrete blocks with rusty iron cable stretched between them right on the tourism corridor. So I'm just wondering where in this it would speak to that, and if we should have some, you know, stipulation that if you're the owner of a brownfield and you don't have the wherewithal to mitigate the you know, the environmental deficit that's there, that at least the place needs to look respectable and reasonable, and we'll kind of help you with that. Is that in here somewhere?
So the first part, Tom, is under unsightly premises. So under part 3, right, really 301A is all about making sure that you're maintaining your building and your land in a reasonable manner. So, and then there's a few subclauses from there. And I think it depends on the property. Like some of them might fall under the grass, trees, and weeds section. But yeah, it definitely does. 315, repair of maintenance of buildings and fences. So there's a few areas where it does apply.
Okay, anybody else? I just have a question on retaining walls. We've got repair and maintenance of building and fences. Is that kind of fit in there, retaining walls in that one?
Yeah, it's described, I think a retaining wall is described as an extension of your building, so it would be part of that.
Okay, perfect. And 3-point, signage, I guess. So we have a situation where a business closed, they painted their sign, but unfortunately at night you can still, it looks not so good. How do we address that?
So, excuse me, again, some of the stuff is in the land use bylaw. I think it just has not been enforced as much. 326 would be the expectation that from a signage standpoint, if it doesn't meet what we expect, then we are given a remedial order and they have 2 weeks to fix that sign. So.
Okay, perfect. Any other comments? Great discussion. Okay, does anybody need a 5-minute break? Nope, everybody wants to keep going? Okay, let's move on to 6.1.
I brought forward 2 items I'd like to discuss and get some guidance on. I'm the representative for the Solid Waste Management Association in town. And there's 2 items that I'd like to bring forward. One of them is SAWA, which is a Southern Alberta Energy from Waste Association. We've seen a little bit of email going back and forth, a lot of cheerleading by the group that are spearheading it. However, I have some concerns and our involvement as a town within the solid waste management. I've got a few points here, and I have there's some documentation to follow it up, but I'm open to questions, and Daryl is also on that committee, so between the 2 of us, we should be able to ask any questions. So SAWA is a initiative that Southern Alberta group of Southern Alberta waste handlers have come up, and they're doing a study on creating a site that would generate power from waste. And in the initial look at it, it sounds like a great thing. However, we have problems as it have problems of it as a community. The association has paid almost $70,000 in the past 8 years to be a member of SAWA. The mandate of SAWA is to divert garbage from landfills and incinerate for energy creation. This effort competes directly with our solid waste management landfill, which has basically 40 years of capacity left. While the cost of SAWA is not really fully determined at this point, in general terms, the cost of incineration is far more expensive than the burial of waste. I think we should consider publicly, by way of letter to the membership, that we don't support this expenditure from this group. And if individual members within the Solid Waste Management Association, counties, towns, and villages wish to support this activity, we'd prefer that they would contribute directly. We're right now about $80 a ton, I believe, for disposing of waste. This would go up tremendously, plus shipping, and we would be moving our garbage from basically on our doorstep to somewhere else in the province. Maybe let Daryl to pick this up, because he has examples of where these systems have proved to be exorbitant in the end.
Thanks, Fred. Actually, just a little correction. So our waste disposal costs on a per ton basis in Drumheller are about $20 a ton. So, generally speaking, if you're disposing of this material at one of these facilities, you're in that $100 to $115 a ton range. So even if we supported it, we would expect to have a significant increase when this thing was built. Energy from waste, so it's a large processing plant. So whether it's you're making milk products or building widgets or creating waste, it's largely mechanical process that deals with it. Big cost for these things, and they do work well in areas like Los Angeles, Chicago, Seattle, Toronto, all areas that have a lot of population in a small area where landfilling is cost prohibitive. The prairie provinces, we don't have that concern. As a matter of fact, we have lots and lots of space. Not to say that you shouldn't look at alternate measures to divert material from the landfill, but really what these things come down to is they build something that is a facility that's based on the amount of tons of waste coming in a year. And what I've seen from past life is that they hold you to that amount. So if you say you're going to bring them 20,000 tons of waste a year and you happen to only bring them 18,000, you still have to pay for 20. So the idea is that they always get paid for that waste, because of course they're spending $100 million on a plant. So I think in our case here with SAWA, it hasn't been sited yet. They're looking to site it somewhere south of the Trans-Canada Highway. So there's a number of groups and committees that are vying for that, because of course they'd like to tax revenue for it. From our standpoint, if we're now going to haul our waste away from a landfill that has at least 40 to 50 years of life left in it, at a significant cost premium, it just doesn't make sense to us. Fred and I and Barb, who's stood in on a couple of these meetings, have said that we don't think even some of the other members in the Solid Waste Association understand that they actually are going to be hauling their waste hundreds of kilometers further away from Drumheller's landfill. What we're suggesting is that we don't support it, and we just want to be able to put it on notice to our Solid Waste Association that Drumheller's not in favor of it, because of course, as Fred mentioned, the association's paid about $70,000 over the last 8 years just to become a member. That's almost like the ability to be on the waiting list for Flame season tickets. You're not even in there yet. You're just paying to kind of hold your queue. So,
comments, Jay?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is not new to Lisa or me or Tom. I served for 3 years on the Solid Waste Management Board then, and Sawa was the same issue. So I do need to double check a couple of things that may have changed in the time since I was serving on there. But the same issues were true then. I mean, incinerators are voracious things. City of Red Deer said no way. City of Calgary said no way. For exactly the same reasons. They would not be held to a contract where they would be paying out cash money if they could not deliver on the volume of waste. So yeah, from the economics of having to ship our waste all the way down to wherever this incinerator was, all under the banner of it somehow being more green than the landfill, when even the research is not clear that that's true, given that there are incinerator projects in Europe and even in Eastern Canada that are clearly not green at all, and that have contributed to significant issues with the environment. It seemed like bad science. And my huge objection, of course, was to this model that I think is fair to describe as public funding for research and development for what ultimately could be a private venture. The scheme by which this incinerator will ultimately be operated has always been described in the most loose terms, and it might be that your membership gets you in on the ground floor having shares. It might be. It might be that it just makes you one of the people who could haul there, as though that's a privilege. It could entirely be that tax dollars from all these municipalities, in fact, go into doing all the groundwork, research and development, for something that winds up in private hands completely and absolutely, which would be, in my mind, criminal. So we objected to it at every step along the way. And so my concern, guys, is that previously they had made us or wanted us to contribute. The individual municipalities were invoiced separately for what their membership fees would be. And I think in the last year that I served, we said, no, we will have no more of this. We will not pay our invoice. And the bylaws of the association said, you don't have a right to do that. And so our response at that time was, then we'll burn this association to the ground. We'll just start over again because we'll opt out, and that'll be very tough for the rest of you to do without us. That's how serious we were. So are you saying that no, in fact, we never did say no and that we continued to pay our individual invoice? Or did the association switch then to paying the invoice out of general revenue and not invoicing the member municipalities? Because, of course, it's simply just stealing from Peter to pay Paul, while allowing the people who sit on the Drumheller and District Solid Waste Management Association, who are much more interested in this and hold tremendous sway over the member municipalities inside their counties, have found a way to get away from our refusal to pay, because we had in fact refused to pay.
Right. And so the answer is the latter part. We're not billed individually. If we were, then we would have absolutely opted out. It wouldn't have been a discussion point. There was no, it is one of those things that was covered under general revenues. It was part of their general budget discussion. And really that's how this came up several months ago, was that we said, well, we object to this and we don't think that, and you know, when we said further, do you, rest of you board, really understand what this means to you? Because I don't think it really does. So
it shows up as a line item in the budget.
Right.
A membership.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the evolution of this. Then was the solution to some of us deciding to opt out was that they would just include it under. Okay. So then you're right. I mean the argument. The trouble is, of course, is that there's been no shortage of SAWA presentations to that board over the time that I served, and it's quite political. There's no other way to describe it. There were at that time when I served a couple of reeves for a couple of member counties, for whom other member municipalities rely on solely for their funding and support for infrastructure of all kinds, who can't find this battle one to die on. And I understand the situation that those people are placed in, but it doesn't change the fact that our interests diverge inside this organization. And so I'm absolutely in favor of you reiterating to the board that that the town of Drumheller wants no part of this project, and that we object to any portion of the amount of money that we contribute being used to support it. Whether or not that matters, again, because as we talked about already, we don't carry the hammer in this organization. On the contrary, we're just a wonderful municipal partner who has to go along with the majority in things. I'm not sure what else we could do other than reiterate our concerns, but yes, I absolutely agree.
And I think what our thoughts with the three of us when we've talked about this is to create a bit of a break in the armor, so to speak, right? If we said, so if Drumheller's council is so vociferous in their opposition to this, that we're prepared to stand on a letter to the board, I think that there are probably other, and with the expectation that there will be a long and serious discussion about this at the next board meeting, because I think there are people, well, I know there are people there that have not a understanding about what this means to them at their community level, right? And again, you have to look at it. What does it? So it might be, yes, that you are getting money from the county, but it's still impacting your ratepayers, and so I think that they just don't understand. Some of them don't understand it. So it's a way to kind of shock them into a discussion with it. So thank you for that, though, AJ. Yeah.
Lisa?
Absolutely agree with what Jay says. I'm just kind of curious, though, what does the city of Calgary have at stake in regards to this organization?
Not a thing.
So why are they lobbying for Sawa's behalf? Are they not? Isn't that what?
No.
Oh,
No.
Did I read it wrong? The other way around?
No,
Okay.
the city of Calgary absolutely refused to take part.
Right.
Okay, so it's just a single councillor.
Single.
Or-
this is
That's
this
a-
is
that's-
this
oh,
is
separate
this
That's
is
a
the-
separate
Okay,
item
I'm like,
that
what?
Councillor
Okay, go on.
Makawecki will need to
Okay.
describe in
Yeah.
detail, because I couldn't find
Okay.
any information anywhere.
Okay.
So to kind of build on what Jay said earlier, so and if you look on Sawa's website, so Red Deer and the area is not part of this at all. Calgary is not part of this at all. Lethbridge is not part of this. Neither is Medicine Hat. My comment at the very first meeting that I was at a couple of years ago was, so if Calgary with 1.5-ish million people isn't interested in something like this, of which if I'm looking for a customer, that's my number one customer. If they're not interested in this, why do you think we should be interested in? And this came to me from a point where, I mean, when I was in Winnipeg, I looked at six of these groups came. Every one of them failed because you always had to pay them a lot more money than you thought it did. And the financials just didn't make sense. And again, that was in a area that had 3 times the population that ours does. So
Gotcha. So the only avenue we have available to us is writing a letter to the board to state our displeasure?
Well, I think that's the first one, is
Okay.
the first step. Yeah. Again, because I think that we really need to be able to convince the other members that that they haven't really seen the full light of it. And again, there's some politicking on the board itself with certain members, so we want to make sure that we let everybody know the full story. So.
Perfect.
Anybody else? So this letter that the village sent. Oh, that's a separate one. Okay, you're just as confused. Good. All right. Well then, okay. I was wondering. I was trying to make heads or tails of that. Good.
I guess we're just looking for
All right.
direction. If the next meeting of solid waste, what we're saying is that this is a position of council, or do we want to send a letter?
I think a letter
Yep.
to everyone on the board. So, and then it can be discussed at the next meeting.
Okay.
All right. Second issue now that we're all confused. All right. Thank you.
Sorry, this is a new one that has been in the news as of late. And I think the best way to sort of give some background is to read actually a notice of motion from Councillor DeMong in Calgary and it'll discuss the issues and basically what we're lobbying for, okay? So I'll just read through this, bear with me. Whereas recycling is an important activity for reducing the amount of waste going to the landfill and allows for products at end of life to be processed into valuable new products, and whereas the cost of programs for collecting and processing and marketing recyclable materials in Alberta are currently carried by local government and funded by taxpayers, and whereas the recycling stewardship programs for 5 regulated materials in Alberta: beverage containers, electronics, paint and paint containers, tires, and used oil materials, achieve some consistency across the province for how these materials are collected and recycled, but do not cover the full costs of collecting and managing these materials, requiring taxpayers to fund the remainder. And whereas the companies that produce the products that need to be recycled can design and operate more effectively and efficiently recycling programs if they work together province-wide rather than individual municipalities or the government of Alberta can on their own, allowing for improved waste diversion infrastructure across the province and higher quality end products. And whereas extended producer responsibility, which is EPR, is a policy approach that places financial and or physical responsibility for end-of-life management of these products with the companies that produce those products, and would remove the financial burden for a recycling program from the taxpayers. And where Alberta is the only province in Canada that has not legislated EPR for any materials and is falling behind in its commitments under the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment Canada-wide Action Plan for EPR, and whereas the Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance Incorporated, an organization that manages EPR programs in 4 Canadian provinces on behalf of obligated producers of packaging and paper products, has signaled its support for CCME goal of producer-led EPR in the province of Alberta, and committed to working collaboratively with Alberta urban and rural municipalities to assist in the funding of collection of baseline measurement data that will inform the design of an appropriate EPR framework for Alberta, assist in the development of recommendations for an appropriate EPR regulatory framework for the province, and work with stakeholders to foster support for an EPR program for PPP. And whereas producer-led EPR in Alberta would also allow recycled materials from Alberta, British Columbia to be managed as a whole, generating a large volume of higher quality products that could incentivize paperclip development of processing infrastructure in Western Canada, creating local jobs and minimizing the dependence on global recycling markets. And whereas in 2018, March 14th and 15th, Alberta Urban Municipalities Association Municipal Leaders Forum in the City of Calgary presented a request for decision to advocate that the Government of Alberta develop and implement legislation to establish EPR in Alberta, and the RFD received unanimous support from municipalities and tenants. It is important for the success of the EPR program in Alberta that there is a shared understanding of the benefits, challenges, and risks associated with such a program for communities of all sizes, industry in the province, and whereas to advance the development of an EPR program in Alberta, research is required on the Alberta recycling systems, supply chains, and the potential impact of the EPR in this province. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council, this is Calgary, allocate the funding from the Stability Reserve to not to exceed, that doesn't matter. 2, cooperate with other Alberta municipalities, AUMA, producers, recyclers of packaged and paper products, and the province of Alberta to develop a baseline that can inform the design of a provincial EPR program by researching into the benefits, challenges, and risks of an EPR program in Alberta for these groups and their constituents, and the current recycle systems and supply chains across the province, potential impact of an EPR program in Alberta, and report back to the SPC on utilities and corporate services no later than October 2019. Now that's followed up by letters of support from the town of Trochu and the town of Acme. And basically what we're saying is that there's groups to start putting pressure on manufacturers and retailers like Canadian Tire and places that produce an inordinate amount of packaging or product that requires recycling to take on some of the responsibility of creating the recycling structures, facilities, and that. And it's not just all bore by us. Today we discussed a blue box program. If we move towards an EPR, then the EPR, the people that produce the garbage or the recycled material will actually be at the table to discuss the solution for recycling. So what I'm asking for tonight is to send a letter of support to Peter DeMong from the town of Drumheller, recognize the importance of EPR programming, and that we'll support them.
Comments, Lisa?
So my only comment on that, so what would be the financial implications?
On us, nothing at this point. It's basically to get them at the table, to get the government, them at the table, and the recycling associations at the table, and put more responsibility on the producer of the material. So for us, there's nothing. The Calgary's committed $50,000, I think, to initiate that process, and we're just sending a letter of support saying, great job, we're on board.
Okay, yeah, and the only reason I asked that was because the city of Calgary ponied up, in essence, and generally when you ask for letters of support where you're already putting money on the table, I just want to make sure that it's clear that there's no monetary value, it's just support at this time.
Yeah, if I could read the Village of Acme's letter, it says, Dear Councillor DeMong, on behalf of the Village of Acme Council, I'd like to thank you for lending your voice to the movement towards extended producer responsibility in Alberta. That the Village of Acme will cooperate and support the extended producer responsibility research, and look forward to information to the Drumheller Solid Waste Management Association. The village recognizes the importance of an EPR programming and creating a clear price incentive for producers to improve the way their goods are managed after a useful life.
Comments? Tom?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea. In my opinion, it kind of brings to mind the problem that we have in Alberta right now with the orphan oil and gas wells all over the countryside that have been abandoned, and some are leaking and some are not capped properly, and they're not maintained. And basically what's happened is that the companies that own these properties basically have gone out of business, and so just kind of washed their hands of it, and there's nobody to kind of take care of them. So the orphan well program, is kind of speaking to this. And what I know what the government is trying to do is have basically companies that are doing wells now contribute to a fund that if and when they do go out of business, there is that fund that could help remediate these properties. So I guess I'm looking at the extended producer responsibility is even extended. For example, at one of my trips to China, we were in a city, I can't remember the name of it, and it was told to us that within 50 kilometers of where we were standing, about 80% of the extruded plastic products in the world were produced. And they had massive factories producing all of the garden chairs and everything plastic that you can think of. And I guess I'm wondering why we don't have some kind of responsibility for these businesses, these manufacturing companies, to contribute to some kind of a recycling way of getting rid of some of these products, because they are literally shipped all over the world. Once they finish their life expectancy, then they go into landfills, and maybe some are recycled. So I'm just wondering if, the provincial governments, the federal government has ever thought about, putting some kind of a tax on these container after container after container of products coming into our country that, end up some being recycled, but most not. So I'm just wondering if that could extend even further than what we're thinking of here.
Right, go ahead.
Sorry. I think it actually is, Tom. If you think about a chain like, excuse me, Canadian Tire or Costco, they get products manufactured, and in turn, being the retailer or whatever of that product, they're going to be held accountable to get rid of that plastic. And I think that you've already seen it in areas that have an EPR. The thickness of the plastic in the water bottles have changed. They're thinner. They're little things like that are a result. So I would just say that what we need to do, I'd like to see, is that we send a letter of support, because I think down the road this is where we all want to go. Is putting the responsibility back on the people that are making the product to find a better solution for manufacturing and packaging. Goodness, who hasn't got an Amazon box that's 10 times bigger than the product in it?
Okay, so that's the point of the letter. So I know we can't vote here, but is everybody okay with me putting up a letter? Tony?
I'd support the letter.
Everybody give me a nod? All right, perfect.
And sorry, I just wanted to add a couple things just to add on. So the province, this EPR program is specifically about recycling of household goods that are already taking place. So it's the stuff that goes in Calgary's Blue Cart. So it's a bit different than what Tom's thinking about, for instance, for lawn chairs and stuff like that. This is single-use type things that are already being recycled. Sorry.
It's a first step.
Yeah, and there are good examples in the province already of EPR programs. Used oil recovery is an EPR program. There's electronics recycling is EPR program. So again, household hazardous waste is EPR, but the big one is that we're one of the last, if not the last province in Canada to put in EPR for household recycling. So that's what they're trying to get to. So.
Okay, perfect. Anything else on that one? I just got to go back a quick sec here, Linda, Julia. On the strategic plan, we had the recycling survey February 11th. When's the next update coming? I need a date.
Well, I think so. The recycling survey is done, right? So we put a checkbox beside it. I think what we got from that is that we're going to go and do a bit more. We're going to go and do more work now on what it could look like, what a program could look like, costs, type, stuff like that. And realistically, that's June, sometime in June.
Okay, let's find June. Sorry, I'm anal. June 3rd?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll just change the... sorry, yes, 10th.
The week after that, yeah,
June
10th.
June 10th. And then can we change the name to Hoodoo, or to the Park and Play, just to Hoodoo Park and Pay, because that's what we're focusing on? And then when are you coming back with an update for us, Greg?
I guess what I heard is that everyone's in favor of us doing a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to
So we're just going to, so we can say that's complete?
And then the idea is we'd come back in the fall time with a report on, or in there. So
we
I would
can
say it's complete.
Done.
Yeah.
Done. Pretty happy about the dones. Okay, thank you. So I am now, last thing I have is 6.2 accounts receivable policy, and that was my request. I was reviewing the receivable policies because, well, it's pretty old. First of all, it's 14 years old. But more so because I'm getting calls on some past due things that are now we're trying to collect. So I'd like some clarity as to why we're doing that when, had we followed the policy, we wouldn't be here.
So, I'm not sure about commenting on not following the policy because the jury's still out on whether the collection on the particular account that you're speaking of was attempted to be made. So my understanding was the actual discussion on the policy was going to move forward in May. So what I was just presenting today was because there has been some concerns expressed that we're not collecting our receivables, I want to prepare the snapshot to put those concerns to rest. So rather than, those worries grow legs and let the life continue to grow. So I just did some stats in preparation because in May I will be writing a report to support the discussion on the policy. But if you want to just walk through this report with me, it shows for 2018 revenue for sales and users fees was $8.2 million. Our trade receivable, and of course this is all draft at the moment, our trade receivable at the end of 2018 is $2.4 million. I'd like you to change the number below that, the percentage from 29.72 to 18.59%, because if you look a little bit below the red line where it says bad debt expense, it shows the breakdown of trade receivables. That number includes our GST receivable and includes manual operating, which it's kind of skewing the numbers because what's in their GST, of course, is collectible to us, and manual operating is mostly collectible accounts, water servicing agreements, DRP claims from the government. So I just didn't want to skew that. So if you reduce that to 18.59 when I take that out, the allowance for doubtful accounts is $58,000, which represents 0.687% of total sales and user fees. And the bad debt account expense for 2018 is anticipated to be $4,782, which represents 0.058% of our total sales and user fees. And if you look at prior years, bad debt expense is typically, well, we've never had anything, everything's been under 0.5%. So in a collection perspective, there may have been one or two things that have gone astray for various reasons, which need to be checked. So again, there's question of whether or not there was efforts made to collect. There was different staffing responsible. But at the end of the day, we have 0.06% bad debt. And then looking down further, if you go down then to the darker part at the bottom of the page, the allowance for doubtful account details, we do have a total allowance will be $58,000. Of that, 42,000 represents ActiveNet, or primarily recreational accounts. And of that, I'm going to backdate now because there's a lot of stuff that has been, allowances have been written, but they haven't actually formally been cleared out of the account. So of that balance of 42,000, in 2018, $4,304 for recreation facility and $91 of before and after school care will be written off. Sorry, what was those amounts? Yeah, $4,304. And again, it's not confirmed. I haven't actually written the journal entry, but that's what I expect. $91 is before and after school. I'm just breaking down these dollar amounts of the 42,000. 2017 was, there's $2,152.84 of receivables, recreation receivables outstanding on the aging, and $939 of before and after school care. And then 2016 and earlier, there's 26,995 of recreation fees and 7,812 of before and after school care. So so that's 42,000 is cumulative from 2018 since the BCF was opened. That represents that total amount of dollars. So again, it's a matter of me coming and bringing the accounts and asking for formal write-off like I do the utility accounts and stuff. But I just wanted to really quash the concerns that, you know, to have a 0.06% bad debt or even 0.05, less than 0.5% every year is, I would say, pretty exceptional.
I agree, Barb. Could you go down in the corner there where it says receivable manual operating? And
Yes.
and explain what the aging are, because 18% over 90 days, I don't understand what that's relation to.
Yes, I can. So the aging is, when I look at the receivable listing for ActiveNet, which represents anything recreational, and before and after school care at the time, it has 42,000 that's over 90 days. And so out of their aging's 235,000 or something, right? 77% of it is current, 2.1% is 30 days, 1.8% is 31 to 60, 61 to 90 is 0.8. So that just shows too that they're doing a really good job collecting money. And then over 90 is 18%, which is a lot of that old stuff. And in total, 42,000 on recreation and before and after school care since the BCF opened is yet to be cleared. Does that help?
Well, I'm the one that brought it forward, so I'll just make the first comment here. So I guess my concern is, yes, I'm getting the phone calls, and you're saying that there's 4,782 in total bad debt, or I'm
That's
confused
this
here.
year's.
Wait. So, but I'm
That's
dealing
this
with bills that are many months, years
So that
old.
42,000 represents outstanding. That'd be part of the old bill you're talking about, is in that 42,000.
So there's 42. So I guess my concern is, and I realize we're not talking about the policy, but Daryl said that I left it on there, but it says we should know this stuff on an annual basis. Why not last year, my whole first term, I never was ever brought forward, and this kind of stuff, I mean, I realize it's not this council's issue and this administration's or whatever, but I would love to see this cleaned up, because to have this, I don't need these phone calls.
Your Worship,
coming.
can I make a motion that we go in camera, please?
Sure. Motion, Christine, second. Fred, all in favor, carried.